This is Guardian Radio, your station for up-to-the-minute news, intelligent, interactive, and engaging conversation. 96.9 FM. The views and opinions of the hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the position of the management and staff of Guardian Network.
Good morning and welcome to Guardian Radio AM. This is C.A. Nuri, and thank you for joining me this morning. Today is Wednesday, June 29th, and it's a little after 11 a.m. in the morning. And once again, I am C.A. Nuri, and I shall be your host for today. And today, I plan to sit down with a social icon whose family has a history of serving their community, whose kindred have left an indelible mark on the landscape on the Bahamas, and who himself, even though his youthful appearance is heralded as being someone who's committed to culture, someone who is committed to uplifting Bahamians and Black people in particular, and of course, someone who has a strong commitment to God. Right? Mind you, my guest is running late, so I'm actually waiting for him. But today, I shall speak to Cleveland Aeneas III, and who I believe is noteworthy of having a personal interview to find out how did he become a pastor and give some information about the history of his family. But as I wait for him, I want to express some information about Fox Hill and Fox Hill community. I am from the Fox Hill community, and right now Fox Hill is in bloom, and we're getting ready to have our Fox Hill Day activities, and we're kind of excited. So if you want to, and I do encourage you to come and drive past Fox Hill, we have a number of fruit vendors who are lined up on the side of the road. We always have dilly. It's dilly season. Right now it's mangola season. And as you know, conch and mango don't grow on the same tree. But you can come there and get a different type of mangoes there. We have mangolas, we have the little small miniature mangoes, and also the hairy mangoes. So I would encourage you to come down and patronize some of the vendors there, right? As we experience this beautiful bloom and kaleidoscope of colors, and the vendors give a number of history. The other day, as I was driving through Step Street, I saw let's see the right word, a Conky Joe Bahamian who was selling, I'm trying to get the right word. It's called stiff something, but it's basically for strengthening men backs. And he's sitting there by himself, right? And you can see that he recycled the bottles, and he's there patiently by himself selling this, right? And giving a narrative of what you can do with this concoction. And I'm saying, am I going to drink that? And they asked me my age and said, well, I said, I'm in my 40s. And he said, man, you're too young for this, man. This is for us senior men. And this makes us strong, you know? So I appreciate that type of culture. And that's something, if you want to experience, come to Fox Hill and go through Step Street. You'll see him sitting right there against the wall, and he'll give you a narrative as to what one can drink and what one can do to be virile as men and cure ailments, right? And it's also is definitely a part of our culture in terms of African, and also a part of our Bahamian culture, where we interact old stories and things that we get from our grandparents and embrace. So I'm kind of excited about that, and I'm encouraging you for that. Well, you know, we didn't have Fox Hill Day for like 2 years now because of COVID, the pandemic. So the idea that they are planning this event, and that we have a number of persons who want to join this event, especially moving toward our 50th year of independence. We're kind of excited in Fox Hill, right? We already contacted all of the junket groups. They're all committed to come and participate. So, yeah, we can't wait. And as I wait for Anku Sarah, I also like to mention the myth of Fox Hill, right? Which says that we actually received the news late regarding being freed. And even though it is a myth because it didn't actually happen, it's something I welcome. It adds flavor to our story, our Foxillian story. I know that Fox Hill is away from the city, but we had roads back then, and it doesn't take a whole day to come and go from Fox Hill. So, but the history of Fox Hill Day came actually via the church. And the number of churches came together in the early 1900s and say that they wanted to celebrate and have a day for themselves. And this is why there's a church history, a church narrative involved in Fox Hill Day, that every year the community moved from one church to the next church and celebrate that. And a person who gives a good narrative of that is the Honorable Fred Mitchell. He enjoys telling the story. And that is something that we need to develop. I'm hoping that this year, or definitely next year, Fox Hill has its own Independence Day celebration, because we have some very talented Bahamians, I think, can come together and display and enact a story that is indicative of what Foxillian is about, and instead of attaching itself to the greater narrative of independence. And I think that's where we should be moving toward, where communities actually celebrate Independence Day and various holidays independently, and invite others to come and participate. And perhaps we can go community hopping and say, let me see what you're doing this way, and let me see what you're doing that way, right? So I just wanted to mention that and invite you to come to Fox Hill, and hopefully you'll see me on the streets and we can sit and talk and chat, because that's what we do. But let me start speaking about Uncle. He's not here as yet, and where I actually met him. He's just recently graduated from school. I think it was Kingsway. And see, he's coming now, so I don't even have to tell that story anymore. You know, as he sits down, and I will continue that narrative. But I met him as a poet, right? And I'll be going in detail about that. But I have his book, The Third Eye. And I'm saying, what in the metaphysics this guy talking about? What's the third eye? So I know that he was on a track of something profound. And to know that he ended up being a pastor, it was no shock for me. I said, this man was always deep. But without further ado, I want to introduce him. Uncle, can you hear me right? Everyone?
Yeah.
Yes. Before you start, I want you to tell me a narrative of your family, the Inez family, because that is important to where I'm going to get to you to go. So go ahead with that.
Well, good morning, all. I did make it.
Yes, you did make it, and you weren't that late at all, and I appreciate that.
Yes. My name is Pastor Dr. Cleveland W. Inez III, also known as Calhoun Uncle Sarah. And my family, obviously this is the shortened or truncated version, but my father is Dr. Cleveland Inez Jr. My mother is Lorinda Mary Hannah. She's now Sanders. My grandparents, Muriel Inez and Cleveland Inez Sr. My great-grandparents on my father's side, W.V. Inez. And he had a Fox Hill wife.
See, there you go, the connection.
Arabella Ferguson, yeah. And in any event, a lot of what people have come to know of my family has been from the Inez side. Mm-hmm. I do have a Hannah side of the family as well. My mother's Hannah.
Nice. I got to investigate that.
Yeah. So it's a rich history. But I say that to say, when it comes to what people, and I still learn stuff about my family all the time, because I'm in the process of reprinting my grandfather's book, Let the Church Roll On.
And talk about that, because I few people know that your grandfather told a tale of coming from Africa, right? Not him particularly, but coming from Africa.
Right.
And he's one of the few Bahamians who can trace and find his lineage all the way to Africa and give that narrative. But tell me that narrative for the audience, for me, please. So
Britton Inez, who would have come here with his sister in the 1800s, he had one wish, which was to let his parents and his family know where he was. Mm-hmm. because when they were snatched out of Nigeria, we are from Abeokuta in Nigeria, and my cousin Godfrey, and yes, I know he's written a little bit about this, so he's researched as well, and of course my grandfather. Ultimately, each generation was told to continue to tell the story so we could ultimately get word back to Nigeria as to where we were. Long story short, my grandfather, Cleveland Indians Sr., he wrote the book Bain Town, which kind of chronicles some of that narrative, as well as even with Let the Church Roll On. And those books were sent back to the university in Abeokuta. So we obviously, it's not our intimate family that knows about it, but at least the community understands that some of the family or the bloodline that was snatched from that area is still connected with that area. We didn't forget, you see? And so when my grandfather, he still has works that he was doing. I remember I was a teenager, and I remember him walking down the stairs. I was walking up the stairs, and he just tapped me on the shoulder. He said, "You got to finish writing the stuff." I was like, "What are you talking about? What stuff?" Right? And as you know, as you get older and you have access to certain information, family information, you realize, okay, I got to do something with this. So I have a lot of pictures. I have a lot of stuff, not just from my grandfather, but my grandmother as well. And that's just on the Indian side. And then on the Hana side, my mother and her relatives, we want to tell that story as well. And so it's really been a story of a people really trying to maintain as much of their selfhood as possible in the midst of achieving through adversity. You know, this idea of colonialism, this idea of slavery, or this reality of colonialism and slavery is something that we have had to face, but still thrive as best we could.
And you mentioned colonialism. I find that your family tells an African story.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a colonial story. Like
No.
They try to find an earthy self. And I find that you, too, tend to do that.
Well, the telling of the African story is the shelter in the midst of the colonialism. If we're not telling that story to our children, and if we're not keeping the vibration of that reality alive, you get consumed by colonialism. You get consumed by a system without being.
Is that important?
It's very important, because what this system teaches us to do is to integrate with it at all costs. Scripturally, they'll say you could gain the world and lose your soul. Okay? This idea of losing the soul is one of not only losing your integrity, but ultimately not having a connection with your bloodline. The book of Matthew, chapter 1, basically the opening of the New Testament starts with the genealogy of Jesus. So there's a very important reality that has to be kept intact with regard to keeping one's bloodline active. Obviously, it's difficult for everybody because we've been mixed up and twisted and turned in the system. But as best we can, we must make that blood link as best as possible to our Africanness, for those who are of the African diaspora.
And speaking of that, I see that your parents purposely chose a particular college for you. How did you manage that? So I'm hinting towards this. I don't want to tell the story. But
let me tell you though. I went to Kingsway. I don't want to forget. I don't want to leave out no one, right? So I did go to Kingsway,
That's
right?
I'm sorry to hear that, but go ahead.
Anyway, we can talk about that another time. In 10th grade, I went off to, actually in 11th grade, I went off to the Bowles School in Jacksonville, Florida, a great swimming school. I went there to swim. And I had actually a scholarship to Coppin State in Maryland for swimming. And about 3 weeks before I graduated, coach called, said, hey, the whole program got canceled. I was like, what? So back to Nassau I came. I did a year at COB. It was horrible, not because of COB so much, but it actually turned out to be the last year that my grandfather was alive. So I ended up really spending time with him the last really few months of his life, because I came home like maybe that May or June. He passed in that December. And so I realized I wasn't coming home for school. I was coming home to be with my grandfather for the last few months of his life. Long story short, I met the provost for Tuskegee University in my grandparents' living room during this last few months, and they, were saying to him, "Hey, this is our grandson," because they were friends with him, and it's like, he's interested in going off to university, and we want you to talk to him. Your parents set you up.
Yeah, yes, sir.
You know what I mean? So he was like, "Yeah, man, I think at the time, I just needed to retake my SAT or something like that." So I did that. And I was running track at the time, so they were looking at giving me a track scholarship, but I did well on the SAT, and boom, off to Tuskegee University I went. I studied biology. I was headed to medical school, or dental. I wasn't sure. I was, looking at different options, but I did take the MCAT after I completed my undergrad. And the head of the Department of Biology at the time at Tuskegee noticed that I was writing plays, I was doing poetry, I was really into the arts. And, sorry.
No, but these things happen.
Yeah.
But your entire family went to HBC colleges, eh?
Basically, my grandmother and grandfather met at Fisk. I say Fisk Meharry because Meharry is the medical school right across the road from Fisk. So my grandfather would have been at Meharry. He went to Tuskegee Institute before I was at Tuskegee University. He went to Meharry. He met my grandmother, who was at Fisk, and he was a dental student. And so, he had told the story about how he would, clean her teeth basically for free, so that when he got in the chair and her mouth was open, she couldn't say no. When he when he was saying, you can be my wife one day, that type of stuff. So they would joke about it, but so they went to HBC. My aunt went to Fisk. My uncle went to my aunt Greta, Dr. Greta Carey, Aeneas Carey. My late uncle, Dr. Judson Aeneas, who met his wife Marquita at Fisk. My sister went to Fisk, Leah Aeneas.
You sound like the whole family to me.
Yeah. And my younger sister, and then she did a JUCO, and then she did go to FAMU. So yeah, so she. So my cousin Costa went to Morehouse, and my cousin Kemba, who's now working in the White House as the cyber head of the cyber department, she went to Hampton, and my other cousin, I think he went to Howard. I don't want to mix that up. Pike, but anyway, and then my other cousins went to one went to Howard. Yeah, both of them went to Howard. So yeah, you're right. Yes,
yeah. But see, I want to understand this blackness that you have about you, and it's as unapologetically African. You seem to seek out an African narrative, and your family seems to have historically seeked out an African narrative. And I want to know. See, I'm leading towards you becoming a pastor.
Right?
Why? Or what craving you had about this Africa?
It's reached more so just simply being who I am. It's not something I had to really seek or really look for. It was a matter of staying in alignment with it. Because when you understand the root of who you are, then you can appreciate the fruit of who you are. So yes, the fruit of who I am is a Bahamian, but the root of who I am is an African, and in particular a Nigerian. And that was always front and center for me in my life. So it was never a question of, I wonder, what I should do in terms of my education, etc. And mind you, before I went to Tuskegee, I had explored going to like FIU. I think I applied to a couple other colleges just to see. While I was at Tuskegee, I would visit Auburn University, which is about half an hour away, to kind of feel what a predominantly white school felt like. And it at the time it wasn't as pressing for me as much as I let me say it this way. I didn't appreciate going to an HBCU while I was there until I really completed it, because my parents, especially my father, my mother did nursing here in Nassau, but my father, anywhere he went in the United States, he could call somebody with some type of influence to get stuff done. And he would be like, oh, this is my classmate. This is somebody who, I went to school with. And I didn't appreciate it as a child. I was like, okay, that's daddy's friend. But then when I got to Tuskegee, even then you don't appreciate it. You know that there are people who have great skill, great talent. I mean, like really smart people. You meet really, really smart people. And then as the years go by, you start seeing people popping up on television or doing important stuff. You're like, oh, I went to school with this person. Oh, I went to school with that. And then you're like, oh, that's what they were saying. That these people, and it's the same thing even with Bowles, which was a predominantly white school. A lot of my white friends at that school, they too are in high places. But I said that to say that the journey is one that requires or it helps when you have great guidance. My parents, my grandparents, none of them said you have to go to a HBCU or else. It was not. I didn't get an ultimatum. It was like, hey, you really, really should think about it.
How did you get the name Uncle Sarah?
So while I was at Tuskegee University, my very first semester, I came in contact with an organization that I'm not a part of called Kahetaru Kara.
What's that?
And it's a rites of passage organization. I guess that's the best way to describe it. But ultimately, it was an opportunity for me to have an experience that I knew I needed to have. In this country, we really need to, and we do it at the Caffrey International Academy, where I'm on the board and have been working with the school from its inception. But we have a rites of passage program. And a lot of the social ills that we see today could be curbed by way of a rites of passage.
So what is rites of passage? Because she used three times.
So rites of passage today, we would understand it as confirmation in the church, which is not a bad thing. However, we have to have systems in place that serve us as a community, as an African community. When I went through my rites of passage, I learned even more about my Africanness. And I learned even more about the diaspora, or where Africans ended up after slavery, right? To the point where I came out of that having an even better, or even more self-confidence in who I was. I said that to say, you asked me how I got the name Anku Sarah. During that process, you're observed and you're given a name.
So that name was given to you?
It was, and I laugh because the name Anku in West Africa, it means child born on a Wednesday, male child born on a Wednesday. And so the first name they gave me was Atu. And I was like, what does Atu mean? I said, oh, a child born on a Tuesday. So you know me. I called Mommy. Mommy.
Was I born on
I was born on a Tuesday? No, child. No, he's born on Wednesday. So I go on back to them like, this got to change. That ain't gonna work.
No.
And so they say, okay, well, these are the names for Wednesday. And I say, Uncle, I want that one.
So you're still able to choose your name?
Yeah. So in that way, I was able to choose it. But the full name is Anku Adisa Gogo Tahimbe Sarah. That's the full name.
Say that again.
Anku Adisa. Adisa is one who makes his words clear. Gogo, like his grandfather. Tahimbe, we stand as a nation. Sarah, son of the Most High. So everybody who completed the rites of passage, they have Sarah at the end of their name, right? And so that began a new journey for me. I remember a friend of mine at Tuskegee, and I was telling everybody, my name is Uncle. And he's like, anybody can remember that. No. You named Trey.
Yes, you know you're straight.
You named Trey.
The swimmer.
The swimmer. At that time, I was running track, right? But even today, people would be like, I ain't calling you no uncle. I ain't calling you with your mommy and daddy name you. They name you Trey. And I was like, no, they name me Cleveland, actually. Trey is a nickname because I'm the third, right? But they always call me Trey. And so in any event, going through that rites of passage impacted me in a beautiful way because it helped me to hold on more to who I truly am,
You're a doctor.
Yes.
A real doctor.
Yes.
Not like a reverend doctor when you get appointed.
No.
You going to school for this?
I went to school. So let's go back to the Tuskegee story. So I took the MCAT. My the head of the department, she said, listen, your scores are good for 3 years. You don't have to rush off to medical school. When you go to medical school, you may not be able to do all these things you want to do right now. So if that's really what you want to do, go ahead and do those things. You can still apply within 3 years and go off to medical school, right? And so I thought about it, and they said, cool. So I did that. I wrote plays, and I really got involved in my poetry, wrote the book Tears from My Third Eye. I didn't know I was writing it at the time. I was just publishing a lot of different pieces, and people kept asking me, where's your book? And I was like, oh, maybe I should make this a book. And so after that, about 3 years, I was already affiliated with the information of the Holy Coptic Church. Insofar as just someone just reading, I would spend a lot of time at Tuskegee. After you finish your homework and stuff, we would debate Bible sometimes till the sun come up. Right, my roommates, we all kind of had that interest for the Bible, right? And so people would come over to our apartment to discuss and debate, and it was fun. And when I became acquainted with the seminary of the Holy Coptic Church, which at the time was called the Holy Seed University, I found a space that allowed me to learn about religion from an African perspective, which is very scientific. So I was like, wow, I don't have to put down the science to pick up the religion. I don't have to put down I could keep both of them, right? And I went into the seminary, and that period that took 4 to 5 years to become a pastor.
4 to 5 years to become a pastor.
That's just the pastorship.
My neighbor just became a pastor. It took him a couple of weeks.
Right.
He said he was saved, and then he went to preach.
Right.
Open up his own church.
And that for some people that works. I come in and knock nobody, right? But it is what it is, right?
Took the long route.
Well, the Holy Coptic Church of the Black Messiah is a teaching church.
So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What is the Holy Coptic Church?
The Holy Coptic Church is the ancient African church. It is the church. The best way we describe it is the church of the three wise men.
And you say an ancient African church.
Correct.
I thought Christianity came from Europe, or at least the Middle East.
Right.
So I'm not sure if I'm appreciating the fact that you're saying this is an African
and I thought
story.
I thought the same way you did till I went to seminary, and because my degree is in critical theology, right? And so we study the writings of the church fathers coming out of Catholicism and understanding the Vedas, and it's really a lifelong study. You don't get it all in those few years, right? But Pope Augustine of Hippo,
Yes.
okay,
I know Pope Augustine.
yeah, and he Alfred Boyd Kuhn writes about how Pope Augustine made the statement of a Christianity before Christ.
Yes, I remember that.
And how...
And that was taught inside the Catholic Church, actually.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So they know this stuff. But he speaks of, and this is around, 4th century, and he's talking about a Christianity 10,000 years before then, right? That is an African. Now, he's coming out of Tunisia, North Africa, so he would have learned that in his schooling, in his education. And so this Christianity, obviously it wasn't called Christianity because this by the time you're saying the word Christ, this is a Greco-Romanized interpretation of the word Christ. This Christ, or this Christ consciousness, is one that has existed for millennia. And what happened is, by the time as the Greeks and the Romans step into this space, they, to the best of their ability, remove any knowledge of this African Christianity. I say to the best of their ability because what they did not expect was that there would be those who would retain the memory as well as the records of this true religious identity to be able to present it in this day and time.
And how old is this Holy Coptic Church? Is this just one of those new religions that just came about a couple of years ago?
If in seminary, anyone who's gone to a seminary would learn that the father of monotheism is called Akhenaten. They say that he was the first to give the world a religion that worships a single God, or what they call today monotheism. Now, he would not have called it monotheism because, again, that's a Greco-Roman term. He called it atonism or at-oneism. And this would have been over 3,500 years ago, okay? He, however, was reviving atonism at that time. They would say that he fought against, or he went against the priest of Amun, not realizing that when they say Amun, they're spelling it A-M-M-O-M as opposed to A-M-U-N, because what the Canaanites and the Greco-Romans do is they name themselves phonetically after a group of people in order to confuse the narrative. So he wasn't going against the priest of A-M-U-N, Amun. He was going against the priest of A-M-M-O-M, or the influences of Greco-Roman narrative that had been brought into our space. In order for him to do that, he had to say to his people at the time, number one, we got to move out of Thebes, where he was. And he created a city called Amirna. This is the original Bethlehem, or the house of flesh. And he and his wife, Nefertiti, they had daughters. And then he had another wife, Chaya, who gave birth to a son who becomes Tutankhamun, or who they call King Tut. This King Tut is in your Bible, in the King James Version. When you read Revelation 3, verse 14, they call Jesus the Amen. Tutankhamun. Tut, or tot, or toddler, the child. Ankh, with the key, or the way to Amun, or Amen, the Father, or they'll say the hidden one. Okay? And so this was a reviving of a religion that had been established by one called Asaru. Now you see Asaru in the King James Version in Revelation 13 and 8, and he is mentioned as the Lamb who had been slaughtered from the foundation of the earth. Now Jesus Christ was not crucified at the foundation of the earth. So this could not have been talking about Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, or who we know as Yahshua Christ, he's a part of the lineage of this Asaru. And so in our seminary studies, we look at the language. We look at the original text so that we can see what was the original message and the intent of what is being called the Bible. I say it that way because nowhere in the Bible do you find the word Bible.
And before you go on, I'm speaking to Uncle Sarah or Cleveland Indians III, Reverend Pastor, right? Cahoon. And I was speaking about him and his trek and his journey to find God, right? And I want to ask, how long is this the organized religion of this Holy Coptic Church? I want to know that starting date. You know?
Right. So that starting date, when you talk about a Saru, you're talking over 10,000 years ago.
No, I'm talking about the modern religion.
No, I'm building it up.
Okay, good.
It has been revived.
Okay, revived
3,500 years ago, and now it is being revived in this time, because 3,500 years ago, when we had this interaction with Alexander the Greek, and those who are now wanting to supplant this information, anywhere between 3,500 and 2,000 years ago, because the calendars obviously are not aligned, right? But some would say 2,000 years ago, some would say 3,500 years ago. This is when you have the Greco-Romanized Christianity being established. And after this period of 2,000 years now, you have the Crest consciousness reestablishing what had been in place 2,000 to 3,500 years ago. So as far as the reviving of the Holy Coptic Church, you're talking, Revelation 8 talks about the space of a half an hour. And that space of a half an hour represents 2 half an hours, from 1970 to the year 2000, and from the year 2000 to the year 2030. So within this final hour, from 1970 to the year 2030, is the reestablishment of the organized Holy Coptic Church in this day and time. So it's been happening now from the 60s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And you see, you call it a Holy Coptic, because Coptic has any meaning?
Coptic means balanced or central point or axis point. Africa as a continent is the central or axis point of the planet. And this is where anywhere we put our universities, our churches, our schools, we refer to it as Coptic, because it's giving you the balanced perspective of the African.
We're about to take a break. This has been Guardian Radio in the AM. My name is C.A. Nuri. I'm having a conversation with Uncle Sarah, Cleveland Indians III,
Cahoon.
I can learn to pronounce that, especially how you're going to invite me to church.
Yes.
But you could call me on another side of the break, with 323-6232, 325-4316, 325-4259, and speak to Uncle Sarah. We'll be right back.
The most important thing in life is family. And whenever you need reliable advice, you look to the people you know you can trust. At J.S. Johnson Insurance Agents and Brokers, we earn our clients' trust every day. Whether it's home, motor, travel, or commercial insurance, we've got you covered. Call 397-2100 or visit jsjohnson.com.
J.S. Johnson Insurance. Peace of mind.
The new Guardian Radio app is here. Listen live to all our Guardian Radio shows and live video stream select programs in our studio. Get information about Guardian Radio shows and our hosts. Send messages, including text, email, and even call. All from our amazing new Guardian Radio app. Download it free today in your App Store for your Apple device or Play Store for your Android device. The all-new and improved Guardian Radio app.
This is Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. Fresh news, smart talk, all day.
And welcome back to Guardian Radio in the AM. This is C.A. Nuri, and I'm speaking to Cleveland. I'm not used to calling you that.
I know, right?
Yeah, okay. Just so people know who you are. I'm trying to call it, right? Establish it.
Yeah.
You're now a pastor, or was a pastor at this time after seminary school.
Correct.
And you've moved away from a pastor to become I watch you pronounce it wrong. Cahoon.
Cahoon, you did it right.
Cahoon.
Yes.
And what is a Cahoon? Cahoon is a pastor?
A Cahoon is one who has passed the rank or degree of pastor and has moved on to a high priest.
Is it like a bishop?
In some instances, some may say that. every church has their hierarchy, you know. But the Calhoun is one who's a part of the council that makes decisions for the church body internationally.
Okay.
And then in particular, being responsible for the Bahamas, and as we move into the Caribbean, you know, that's kind of.
And I want to speak about you opening a church here, but I see we have a caller here. And
Sure.
Let me get that caller input so I can start that conversation. Go ahead, caller. Thanks for calling.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Is that term acceptable?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I have a question on the earlier part, but you just mentioned that I'm not paraphrasing, that every organization has its hierarchy when you were asked about the term bishop, etc. So that perhaps may trigger the question I want to ask, meaning that the universality of mankind and accepting others, you know, because we're focusing on blackness, so we're assuming that there are other as well ethnicity that exists and so on. But my question is really, before I get even deeper into that, my question is, was the word created? Is there a creation story and the approximate age of the earth as is? Because I did hear you mention that something existed about 10,000 years ago, or something like that. Or
Yes.
so I just want to get a full understanding of the where the creation gets into the picture, and also the black colleges versus the white colleges and the rest of it. Whether the black colleges accept the whites and whether the white colleges should accept the black, and where is this whole idea of racism? Where did that came from, and why is there such a segregation, so to speak, that exists in the world, or why there is need for it to be maintained?
Okay.
Thank you much, caller.
So, creation story. Within the African theology, you have 4 primary creation stories. And those stories come out of the 4 schools that we originally went through, excuse me, to attain the title of a Calhoun, okay? Today, you would hear people talking about the Ankh, A-N-K-H, which is an African cross. The Ankh was not merely a cross, though. It was actually the 4 schools of Anu, Nut, Chemenu, and Heteketa. These 4 cities or 4 schools that one would have to matriculate through in order to pick up their cross. Today, we would say associates, bachelors, masters, PhD. I say that to say that when we talk about, for example, how old the planet is, the planet, as far as atonism is concerned, our records speak of 24 billion years. And a matriculation through that 24 billion year crash that took place that NASA has identified. They don't necessarily speak of the time period, but they talk of the event of, for example, Uranus being laying on its side because of a huge crash that took place billions of years ago. They talk about the Grand Canyon being the result of a crash, and the moon coming out of that space where the Grand Canyon now is, and they mine the same materials from the moon as they do the Grand Canyon, which lets you know that it's from the same part of the earth. I think it's uranium. They mine from there. But I say that to say that we've been capped, as far as our knowledge is concerned, with a period of 6,000 years. They'll say, well, the earth is about 6,000 years, which makes no sense from a scientific perspective, because Genesis chapter 2 talks about good gold, and good gold takes longer than 6,000 years to form in the earth. So the creation stories have been tapped into to create this monotheistic creation story. And obviously we don't have time to talk about all that today, but in answering the second part of your question in terms of understanding the difference between the black universities and the white universities, there was a time where we were not allowed as black people to go to white universities. So when we start to ask the question about racism and supporting a historically black university, if the white universities were not racist, there would be no need for historically black universities. Booker T. Washington, when he started the Tuskegee Institute, it was a vocational school. It was a school where people could come and learn a skill in order to function in life. You know, you can't take a people out of their natural habitat, carry them through hell, and then one day say, "Oh, you're free." Like, free to do what? Right? We had to be taught on certain levels because we were very skillful, which is why they could build their society off of us. But there was a part of us that still, there was a void, this void of selfhood that is still being patched together. So you had great men like Booker T. Washington who started Tuskegee Institute so that we could have a space to learn like we learn, and to have the opportunity to function in a way that serves our communities, not just, hey, I have a degree and I'm just going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a lawyer. Okay, that's fine, but what community are you serving? So the black experience adds being back into, or this idea of becoming back into the formula of education. I'm not just doing something to get paid. I'm doing something to rebuild something that has been destroyed.
I understand. I have a text here. It says, "Great show as usual. I went to Kingsway with him. He was always smart, but his mother named him Cleveland, so I'm going to call him Cleveland." And Uncle, I plan to invite you back. I see I have like 6 minutes. I'm going to speed things up, and I'm going to take that caller right now, right? But I want to know more about the Holy Coptic Church and basically how you all get to the Bahamas.
Right.
I
So
assume
just to
that
answer that text, my mother calls me Trey.
Trey.
Yeah.
No, okay. I understand. So many different things. But let me go to this caller. Go ahead, caller. Caller, let's see if we can fit your question in. Can you hear me, caller?
Yes, hi, good day.
Go ahead. Good day.
Gentlemen. Uncle, I want to touch on a few things. I know we have a short time. But wasn't there a time period when there was a sort of a civil war when the monotheistic community was warring with the polytheistic community, and they decided to worship one God, and that's how we got to basically Christ or Jehovah or God now. And aren't there many gods? And the second thing I want to harp on is, in the Egyptian temples, all of the hieroglyphics pretty much allude to spirituality is the only purpose on earth, and everything else is just trivial. So is the world going back to spirituality as the number one focus? And does the Bible speak about this in the last days when, heaven and earth will be wiped away? Touch on that. Thank you. I'll listen.
Okay, so obviously we don't. This is the short answer.
Yeah, short answer. We're going to speed up. We're going to get found your schedule so we can invite you back. Just to talk about the religion in general.
Yeah, definitely. Isaiah chapter 19 gives us a peek into Alexander the Greek and Ptolemy coming into what is being called Egypt. They called it Egypt, Aegyptos, but it was called Kemet or Tamaray before that. And in the 18th verse of that chapter, it talks about the 5 cities speaking the language of Canaan, because those are the people who were invading and taking over. I say that to say, through all of that, yes, Akhenaten would have had to remove his people away from that chaos and take them back to the worship of what he referred to as Atun or Aten. And this Aten or Atunism is one that allowed for us to then appreciate our culture with not many gods. That's what the Greeks and the Romans said. But we had many aspects of the Most High that they called the Naturu, or aspects of nature. The second question with regard to, I'm trying to remember what the second question was.
I'm not sure, but
Right.
I'm running out of time.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I'll answer that once I remember. But go ahead.
No, actually, I have 2 minutes, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I can answer any more calls.
Yeah.
But your religion
Yeah.
seems very Bible-based. Every minute you quote biblical scriptures.
Yeah, because in the beginning was the word, but that word was the metu neteru, or the words, or they call the hieroglyphs, or what is referred to as the Shabaka stone. The Shabaka stone sits in the British Museum today, and it's where the Torah comes from, which they refer to as the Old Testament. And so, in understanding that we have records, that we have an intellectual history, it allows for us to see things without worrying about who cares about how we feel about it. We have our own records. We don't have to apologize for having our own records. They call us pagan, but they fill all of their museums with all of our quote-unquote pagan stuff and make money off of it all year. So we, as true Christians within the Holy Coptic Church, are going back to our intellectual heritage, our spiritual heritage, and we thank you for having us on this show, my brother.
I was speaking to Uncle Sarah. This is C.A. Dury. I plan to invite him back. I'm going to plan to invite him back quickly so we can continue the story about how they came to the Bahamas and to have a church, a Holy Coptic Church in the Bahamas. But I'll see you next time. Again, this is Guided Radio AM. This is C.A. Nuri, and I was speaking to Uncle Sarah, Cleveland Indians III, Kahoon of the Holy Coptic Church.